Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Spacing Out. I'm Jason McClellan.
And I'm Maureen Elsberry. Thanks so much for joining us. Later in the show, we'll be joined by military and aviation journalist Tyler Rogoway. He's going to talk about something you've probably seen in the news lately, which is all those UFO encounters that pilots have been having.
But first, we've got our drinks in hand, so let's jump into the news.
It's Jason and Maureen, totally awesome. News, 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 news.
We believe all news, good or bad, is better when paired with a good beverage. So, Maureen, what are you drinking today?
So this is an inappropriate glassware for what I'm drinking, but I'm drinking possibly the dirtiest ever martini in a water glass because I have recently moved and I don't know where my martini glasses are. How about you?
Well, that's a good excuse. And I guess if you're going to be drinking a dirty martini, you should be drinking it in inappropriate glassware.
It's a clean glass, at least.
Clean glass is good, yeah. Well, I'm drinking the manliest drink that I think I've had on the show, and that is this very pink drink. Very manly. Yes. So this is home-infused vodka with blueberries and basil, which is very good, and also some home-squeezed lemon juice. So it's very tart, but refreshing. Because It's like 93 degrees where I am.
Hey,
Phoenix,
it's raining and cold here, so that's not fair.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers. I'm just glad you are also drinking out of some, crazy water glass here.
Exactly. We had to do it up with our inappropriate glassware.
Absolutely.
First, we're revisiting a story we covered quite heavily back in 2013, a tiny story. A tiny story. That's right. We're talking about our little friend Ada, the tiny humanoid discovered in the Atacama Desert back in 2003 by a treasure hunter.
Ada was the focus of the 2013 crowdfunded documentary Sirius, which was produced by J.D. Serafine and focused on the work of Dr. Stephen Greer. While the movie was being filmed, Dr. Gary Nolan, a geneticist at the Department of Microbiology and Immunology at Stanford University School of Medicine, contacted Greer and Serafine and offered to sequence the being's DNA. His initial findings were that it was 92% of a match to a normal human.
Misleading comments by both the filmmakers and the media taking Nolan's findings out of context led many to believe that this was a mummified extraterrestrial being. After the film, Nolan went on to spend 4 years with a team of 10 scientists to research the mutations that might be causing these anomalies. The findings from the study were recently published in the journal Genome Research and concluded that this highly unusual specimen was that of a fetal female with gene mutations and a highly unusual bone disorder causing premature ossification.
Nolan's findings could vastly improve the understanding of such mutations and provide a picture of how this could enable drugs for rapid bone healing and give us a greater understanding of rare and unique disorders like Ada's.
But is this case finally closed? Some would say no. Greer recently appeared on The Carol Rosin Show on a segment called The Stanford Atacama Cover-Up. He gives a lengthy rebuttal to Nolan's findings and alleges that the story is not over, nor does he plan to give up on it anytime soon.
Wherever you stand on the matter, I think we could all agree that Ada needs a little break from the poking and the prodding and should likely be returned to her home, the desert in Chile.
Summer is quickly approaching, and that means all sorts of UFO conferences and other events are almost upon us.
There are so many UFO-related events happening all the time, but there are quite a few conferences in the summer. Here are some that you might want to check out. The McMinimans UFO Festival takes place in McMinnville, Oregon, May 17th through the 19th. Investigative journalist George Knapp and investigative filmmaker Jeremy Corbell will be among the speakers at this year's event.
Contact in the Desert takes place in Indian Wells, California this year, June 1st through 4th. This large event features tons of speakers, including Richard Dolan, Nick Pope, a bunch of guys from Ancient Aliens, and, most importantly, our buddy Jeremy Corbell.
And don't forget the Roswell UFO Festival taking place in where else? Roswell. This year's event is happening July 6th through the 8th, and they're still working on the details, but Roswell is always all sorts of weird, and weird is good. And last but not least, we're excited to announce that Rogue Planet is once again going to be at Denver Comic-Con. We'll be presenting a few panels, and details will be on our Rogue Planet Facebook group in the upcoming weeks.
Yeah, we still have to figure that out, but we're going to have some really cool stuff, and super excited to be going back to Denver. We have a great time in Denver, and I don't know, we talked about it, but I had so much fun last year, Maureen. Our panel on Real Life X-Files was so much fun last year.
Yeah, it was great. It was sold out, and so we're really hoping to sort of carry on the momentum, and hopefully people are still as starved for the UFO and paranormal topics, because there's not a lot of that in this sort of event usually, but this year there will be.
And a lot has happened in the world of UFOs since last year.
Absolutely. We have. I guess I shouldn't announce who else is going to be there. I almost did, but we'll keep it top secret. But we'll just say there are other people that will be presenting topics of similar matter. That's going to be very awesome. And we hope as well that we'll be able to either do a live episode of Spacing Out There or something. We'll keep you posted and see what happens. But yeah, I'm definitely excited for this year. I'm a little bummed. We talked about these other UFO events that Jeremy Corbell is going to be speaking with George Knapp at the McMinnville UFO Festival, which is not that crazy of a drive from me. I'm in Seattle, but unfortunately, I already have plans I cannot get out of that weekend, so I'm going to miss it. But I'm missing all these events this year. Yeah,
it's a bummer. I really wanted to get up to McMinnville too. It'd be fun with George Knapp and Jeremy there, but. Yeah, it's interesting, and we mentioned with how much has happened since last year, since when we were in Denver, in the UFO world, largely in part credit to the Stars Academy for sort of busting the government's the Pentagon's UFO program wide open, and with that, there's been trickling of videos and stuff here and there, and a lot of research coming out now, and people involved with To the Stars. There's so many people involved with To the Stars, and one of those people is Dr. Gary Nolan. So, a person revisiting this old Atta case, it's funny to see. I'm glad it made news again. I'm glad that Dr. Gary Nolan continued the research on this and put it to bed as it needed to be. But really, his findings, are the same. The main the main punchline remains the same as it always was, and he's all human.
This is human.
It's a weird human, but human.
Absolutely, and I'm on the side, of course, where personally for me, I am more to side with Gary Nolan than Greer. I listened to a very brief portion of his interview on Carol Rosin's show, and so I can't talk really because I didn't listen to the whole thing, but I did hear him talking about some things. And they were coming out now. Gary Nolan's results were showing, this looked like everyone was saying this was probably a really old find. This mummy was from a long time ago, but now they're saying it's probably only 40 years old. And I did hear Greer saying 100 to 140 on Rosin's program, and going on and trying to scientifically or medically refute all of his statements. So obviously this is one of those things where people are going to believe what they want to believe.
Sure.
We see this all the time with every case. So because this study has come out, it's closed the door settled the case for many of us, I think. But there's also going to be a ton of people that still are, this is a cover up.
Absolutely.
So free to believe. Mm-hmm. I'm not judging. And like I said, I didn't watch the interview. If people want to, they're more than welcome to. But yeah, Atta was a unique thing because there were these obvious, extremely visible mutations, and they weren't sure if it was some rare form of dwarfism or what was going on, because the bone density appeared to be that of like a 6 to 8 year old child.
Yeah, that threw everything off.
Fetus. Yeah,
and because of all the huge mess of mutations going on, it made even the basic details, very difficult to conclude anything. Back when they were initially reporting findings or what their studies revealed, they said it was a male.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's interesting because we did cover this on Spacing Out way back in the day when Sirius was first about to be released.
Right.
And, I actually kind of went and rewatched a little bit of that the other week. And you call it a boy. So, but yeah, so female, they found the Y chromosome and went from there. And the massive amount of mutations that this is an extremely incredible medical find.
Yeah.
And hopefully this provides a lot of really valuable research into these types of disorders. And we can understand this sort of diseases and odd occurrences better.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's highly valuable. And like you said, I mean, like with UFOs or anything else, we encourage people to take the information, do their own research. They can make up their own minds. They're going to anyway. But you don't have to believe Gary Nolan, but look at his credentials and look at the credentials of the people who did the studies. I think it's pretty valuable to look at that.
Absolutely. It's now time for our interview with aviation journalist and editor of Time Inc.'s The War Zone, Tyler Rogoway.
Tyler, we've been wanting to talk with you for a while, so we're really excited to have you on today. Welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be with you guys.
Well, specifically today, there are plenty of things to talk about for sure, because some interesting things have been happening. But specifically, I really want to get into this story that you wrote back in November about an incident that occurred on October 25th, 2017. In Northern California and Oregon, really. And that was about this incident that occurred between commercial air traffic, an unidentified object in the sky, and the scrambling of fighter jets. So we've discussed that a little bit on this show, but if you wouldn't mind, kind of give us an overview of what that incident was.
Sure. So, in the late afternoon, around 4 o'clock on the 25th of October, it was good weather, actually, over the Northwest, which is rare that time of year. It's beautiful. And a air traffic controller from Oakland Center saw on his radar scope an intruder, which means that it doesn't have any – it's, not squawk – well, it potentially squawked a code, meaning it sent out a transponder code for a moment. But, it's tough to tell with other traffic if that was confusion or what. We're still up in the air about that. But this thing was moving really fast. And we have all the tapes now of the controllers talking and everything else. And you can tell this was like something they hadn't seen before, especially over, Oakland Center controls a massive amount of airspace. And then you got military operating areas and everything else they deal with and, transient traffic. So they see a lot of stuff, So it's interesting. The response was strange, but eventually this thing was heading on a southern route at very high speed over Northern California, took a very hard left turn to the north, and then it disappeared, totally went off radar. It was not sending out any transponder transmissions. It was not talking to air traffic control. So it was what they call NORDO. It didn't have any communications beyond just being a primary target at one period of time. But after that, it disappeared. So now this thing was just gone.
And so that in of itself is weird, right?
Here's the deal. And people, think of radar as sort of like this monolithic, system that can see everything. It's very persistent, and it isn't. Different things can happen in the atmosphere, and, the quality of the actual system itself, the angle to the target, the Doppler effect, a bunch of different things can go into how an object appears on radar, right? So, but the problem is that happens transiently. That's a moment in time where something will disappear because of its angle or because of the atmospheric, scenario or whatever, and then it reappears moments later. So at this point in
the story, this is already an interesting incident.
Oh yeah. You can hear you can go to my website and hear controllers, and they're like, wow, okay, they don't. You can tell that they have not dealt with this a lot. This is something that's fairly new. And so, yeah, eventually, you know, they got the idea. You can tell that this thing merged with air traffic. And Northern California up to Seattle, there's kind of a corridor that goes down the Willamette Valley. And there's a lot of air traffic going back and forth. That's a big air transport corridor. So there's a lot of stuff going on up there. And then we get into this scenario where kind of around the border there of Southern Oregon, around Crater Lake, the air traffic controllers start asking pilots, hey, do you see something off your, 11 o'clock or 2 o'clock? Because we kind of, had a target for a moment, or, we can't see it now, but maybe it's near airspace. Pilots don't get that a lot. So they were kind of, weirded out by it a little bit themselves. But there's about 3 aircraft that reported seeing it. And not just for a moment, flash by us or something like that. This went on we have at least 30, 40 minutes of tape of this occurring. And it went pretty much up the Willamette Valley. And then those airliners that were watching it, and they couldn't make out what it was. They couldn't tell if it was what airline or, anything like that. No defining features aside from it being white in color or in tone.
Sure.
And, one of the pilots we actually FOIA'd, Freedom of Information Act request. We got a bunch of information, including the telephone recordings of the interviews of the pilots afterwards between the FAA. And one of the pilots that had the best view of it, he said, was asked, was it small? Was it big? What was it? And he said, this was no Learjet. This was a big aircraft that we were looking at.
Right.
As far as what type, nobody can make it out. It was just a large, from what we can tell from all this information, it was just a large dot or speck out there that was white in nature. So eventually these airplanes that were kind of watching this thing descended into Portland, or went on to a different direction.
Yeah.
So they lost sight of it, and the sun was going down at this time. And right in that moment was when the F-15s out of Portland were scrambled to look for this aircraft or this object or whatever this thing was.
And what did they find?
They didn't find anything.
Yeah.
And very advanced aircraft now. They have new radar systems and electro-optical targeting systems. So they're good, and they train constantly on this exact mission. Going out and identifying aircraft for the Noble Eagle or Homeland Defense type missions. So, and in the tapes that we got too, which is so interesting, it's an unprecedented view in this sort of the back end of what happens when something like this occurs. Yeah. We get a lot of talk between the military, the Western Air Defense sector that controls that airspace. It's part of NORAD, and the FAA. And, it took a while for them to get those F-15s up. And even after they went up and it was all done and said, there was also a lot of confusion of who actually ordered the scramble. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this that we found out, since the story was first developed. But the bottom line for your viewers is that even with all this information that we have, we still don't know what this was. We have no clue.
Yeah.
It was moving faster than the airline traffic around it. It doesn't mean that it was going Mach 5 or something. But it was outpacing the 737s that were traveling up in cruise. So we know it was had good performance, whatever it was, and we know it was large, and we know it was white in color, and that's all we know.
And you did such a great job with the FOIA requests and, obtaining these audio recordings. And I'm sure some people, a lot of people probably, listening to that would be a little bored. But I don't know about you, but that is some of the most thrilling audio to listen to. Just hearing this all unfold, and from many different angles too.
It totally is. And I don't report on unidentified flying objects. I'm a defense reporter.
Right.
So I'm in this for a different reason. I don't think anybody in aerospace or defense, if they told you, I have no interest in the, UFO kind of history and lore, I could never believe that. Because, that's obviously intriguing for anybody that loves flight or any, space flight or anything like that. But with this particular deal, it's so interesting because we have really hard evidence, and we have pilots, trained people, radar operators, Western Air Defense Sector, all trying to look for this and try to figure out what this thing is. And towards the end of all this, a couple hours of audio that we got, we actually have the conversation between the Seattle Center Air Traffic Control Manager and the Quality Assurance Department at the FAA, like the phone call. And you can tell from these people that the Quality Assurance group that they get any crazy thing that happens, weird thing every day that happens in the airspace, they hear about it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's their job. And even they don't know how to deal with this.
Right. That was shocking, And it's not like unidentified objects aren't common. They are common, and pilots report these things quite frequently. But an incident like this, with multiple in-air sightings and conversations with the ground, made it kind of a more special incident. And you said it exactly right. I mean, it's kind of surprising and shocking how unprepared it seemed that people were with the procedures and how to deal with this.
Yeah, that's my takeaway too. And just considering that, like I say, a lot of stuff happens in the air every day, outside of like any sort of sightings or anything, just weird crap happens,
Mm-hmm.
Pilots get lost and they end up in military operating areas. And they have to scramble fighters, and Air Force One, or the Air Force One's on the ground somewhere, and there's airplane strays. So we have all these things that happen on a daily basis, but they kept saying, and they weren't thinking, oh, I'm being recorded here. This is just normal conversations that we had to FOIA and get the recordings of. This is phone, not radio,
mm-hmm.
not on the open source at the time.
Yeah.
So, they were really, you can tell that this was a very unique event, and the level of detail and the length that it occurred over were, like I say, unique. And so that's why we kind of followed it through to the point where it is today. But even after all of this work that we put into it and kind of, looking deeper, usually there's an explanation, right? You can say, listen, this is what I do for a living. I debunk stuff.
Right.
You say, listen, you guys don't understand. The military operates in this area, this and that. I mean, there's a couple things, a smuggler, but you're not going to really have an airplane disappear on radar for that period of time if it's the Learjet that's stolen, okay? So that doesn't make any sense really now that what we know. At the time, maybe, possibly, somebody going up to Canada or whatever. But, that doesn't really, it's not a good match.
Mm-hmm.
Only thing that, people ask me, like, what do you think it is? And I said, well, on the spectrum of what's out there, we do know that unmanned systems are being tested. We've seen quite a few of them already. The higher end of it is there's stealthy flying wings that allow to penetrate into any enemy airspace undetected for periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
And surveil over enemy airspace. This is an operational capability. The RQ-170, it fell right into the Iranians' hands in 2011. We all saw those images.
Yeah.
That may be straight off a range in northern Nevada. The Fallon Ranges are there. It's actually happened before, like I say, the Iranian incident. But, it has to end up somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So with that's kind of a missing link as well. And, then people say, oh, it's a secret airplane that they're moving from Area 51. Well, that's not how they do it. They don't go in broad daylight and freak out. All the FAA have the military scramble jets after them. It makes no sense for them. And that's historically, they've never done anything like that to move a secretive asset. They just call it a Gulfstream 5 and do it at night. Nobody knows the difference.
Right.
So we really don't know what the deal is there.
And,
mystery unsolved.
I mean, we heard them say that, somebody's going to go through this with a fine-tooth comb for sure. Do you think we'll hear any more, or do you think we've heard all that will be allowed to be released about whatever happened?
Well, the weird thing with these stories, what I found out just in my time doing this sort of thing, is they kind of have a life of their own.
Right.
And usually they'll sit, for a period of time, and then maybe somebody that was involved at the time that had retired or whatever said, hey, I was there. This was the rumor I heard, or, we actually looked into this farther and, more, and you should maybe look in this direction. So I can't say that it's done, we definitely tried to get what we could out of the FAA, and you can tell it seemed like they didn't have much more to report.
Yeah.
They interviewed the pilots. I mean, what else are you going to do? But we got to remember this. We don't have access to NORAD's information. They are not you can't FOIA NORAD. It's exempt.
Yeah.
So, maybe they have a better intelligence assessment of what happened that we don't know about, but that's just speculation.
Yeah. Well, something you did really well, I thought, in your story about this was, being a responsible journalist and, suggesting the possible explanations for what this thing was. And then, based on your experience and various reasons, why those were unlikely explanations.
Yeah, I think, like I say, I try to debunk anything I can, but there's no good fit. If there's no good fit, there's no good fit. And so I think putting that forward, and, everybody's going to read this and think UFO. I mean, they're not, I'm saying it's part of our culture. So you don't have to go out and say that and put it in people's faces. Now, what did change was we published this on, I think November 13th or 15th or something like that. A month later, we get the threat assessment that broke from the Pentagon that they've been looking at this and that they have videotapes of, the F-18s down off the Baja Coast that saw that flying Tic Tac thing. And, we know that there's been a program ongoing that's not necessarily about exploitation of any, the claim isn't super high. It's more of a threat assessment.
Right.
So that kind of changed the story totally, and being much more plausible to have a more open mind about what this could have been, but also that maybe the Defense Department did look into this more than we know.
Right.
And that's still another story that's going to be ongoing. The threat assessment thing, we still don't know everything about really what that program was.
Right.
We know a lot.
Yep.
But we don't know where it went. Supposedly it shut down, and we get multiple reports now that it didn't.
Yeah.
And for me as a defense guy, I mean, that is, regardless of where the origin of a thing comes from, if it's deemed a threat or needs to be looked at and examined in that way, it's relevant.
Absolutely.
So it changed the story quite a bit when that came out.
Yeah. Yeah, and you did the same thing too with your story about the Learjet and the Airbus over southern Arizona, right? February 24th, that incident, suggesting possible, well, I guess they did, right? The pilots themselves suggested or asked if it could be a Google Loon balloon.
Yeah, they were. I mean, there was multiple guys on that channel, or pilots.
And somebody kept saying UFO, right? That was funny.
Yeah, and the thing with the radio traffic, we don't know exactly who's talking at what time. You can kind of tell by their calls, and their IDs, and you try to extrapolate. But there was a lot of kind of, let's put it, informal talk on the frequency at that time. Yeah. So that was being suggested multiple times. I can just tell you this on that story, that people that are involved with it still are kind of weirded out by what they saw. And, with that particular deal, I got that from, an anonymous source came to me had heard that while they were flying in the area, a very good source, and said, hey, this was so weird. We couldn't listen to it for the whole time because we were transiting out of that radio range. But you should jump in, and if you can, maybe see what the deal was there. Yeah. And, FAA was great. I called Albuquerque Center, and their guy there was fantastic. In fact, we didn't have to go through FOIA for that. He just released the tapes. He's like, hey, this happened. But at the time, the operations manager didn't even know about it. So that was kind of odd, because you got an object in the flight levels that could, you're talking about, even if it's standing still up there, that's a closure rate of 500 miles an hour for an aircraft. It could do extreme damage. Mm-hmm. You'd think that there would be some sort of report that thing was seen. Right. But from what we could tell, there isn't. Now we're doing a FOIA request on that as well. But But yeah, two pilots saw it. The Learjet was heading east over kind of just south of Phoenix there, between Phoenix and kind of the border of New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
They're up at 37,000 feet, and there's actually an aggressor Learjet that they do, Phoenix Air. They do a lot of work with the military. In fact, that's their primary contract there. They fly as missiles, simulate missile attack runs on ships. Okay. So the pilots, these guys have seen everything. Yeah. I mean, they're not just your standard airline pilot that's been busting around people. These guys do very unstandard flying.
Interesting. For
the military in restricted ranges, working in sensitive technologies, etc. So this isn't just, some guy that came out of flight school and is flying, a right seat in a Q400 prop plane or something. This is a unique set of individuals in this aircraft. Mm-hmm. And, they saw this thing pass over them. That was, like at high speed, a couple thousand feet above them. And it was odd looking. We don't know the exact description, but he couldn't put an ID on it. Now, if you're a pilot, you see just a round object that's kind of clear or has some reflection to it. I think you just say, oh, that's probably a weather balloon. It really is. And they do get launched every day. Right. They're up there. They have to ascend all the way up and then they fall. So, they carry, small payloads. So, and they're not tracked a lot of the time. If they're under a certain weight, they don't need to be. Didn't seem like that was it.
Yeah.
And then the air traffic controller, who was just cold as ice during this whole period of time, he had an airliner built, I believe it was American Airlines built behind him, say, hey, this thing, kind of going the same course. This thing was spotted, keep an eye out, and it flew right over the top of them.
Wow.
And on that second time, there was a lot more conversation about what it maybe was. And you mentioned that somebody mentioned a Google balloon and immediately said, no, that wasn't it.
Yeah.
Now, the military is super active in that area. Super active.
Yeah,
you have White
definitely.
Sands to the east. You have tons of military operating areas in southern Arizona. But like I say, why middle of the day you're doing that at 40,000 feet? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. And on that topic, I mean, you specialize in military and aviation. Just how many different projects the military is working on that we even know about, and others that have been rumored. Just so many of these drones, these unmanned drones that exist that we're not used to seeing because they haven't been released publicly. Pilots probably aren't used to seeing them because they're not something they would see on a regular day during their normal course of flying. So the skies are filled with all sorts of things that look confusing to a witness. And we typically regard pilots as being better UFO witnesses because, they spend their time in the air. They know what things look like, what normal things look like in the air. So when there's something that they don't recognize, that's a little more credible than somebody just on the ground saying something that's not used to things in the sky. But that being said, yeah, I mean, you're posting stuff all the time about all these different drones and new craft that are being built all the time.
We really don't know what has been developed in the last 50 years. We get a few things that get declassified. Really, there have been like a handful, like 4 over the last 35 years that have been declassified, right? That have been tested, that are strictly test, articles and everything else. And those things look very strange to a person that doesn't know what they're looking at. So, I mean, if you look at a flying wing, look at the B-2, for instance. If that thing is flying on its knife edge, or you looking at it from an angle that is not a head-on or from a planform, upper or lower viewpoint, it looks like a flying saucer. It is literally that's what it looks like. So, I mean, there's a lot of that out there. Let's just put it this way. We have a tiny tip of the iceberg. We know what has been tested. Things stay classified oftentimes for very little reason for a very long period of time, and sometimes never come out of the black. A lot of times, like, you know, when these things are tested and they're done with them, they'll literally bury them in the desert where they were tested.
Yeah.
I mean, actually in the ground. So, you know, it's something that, and you can imagine how far the technology has come on a very high end experimental level compared to where we were, you know, 25 years ago when the F-117 was, you know, cutting edge, or 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So we're talking, you know, a lot of times, even I think the most versed person in this field wouldn't really know what they're looking at potentially, depending on what the technology they were viewing was.
Yeah.
That being said, I got to be honest with you. I mean, with the UFO thing and the whole ufology community, I think they just do so much more harm than good to themselves. I mean, I've said this on other radio shows and interviews. You know, I mean, I get stuff sent to me all the time. I mean, every day.
Sure.
And none of them usually, they're just so plainly debunkable. It's by people that just want so bad to have seen something or be part of this phenomenon. And they're not looking for you to tell them what it is. They're looking for you to tell them what they think it is. Militantly.
Yeah.
And I'll literally write back, hey, sorry, man, I've seen that a million times in my camera. You know, that's just, you know, anomaly. That's this, it's that, or not convinced, you know, and then it'll blow up at you, you know? So, the reality is, I look at it as like, hey, listen, on a scientific level, you have a certain amount of these things that have happened over, you know, the course of human history that are really unexplained, that have great sourcing, that have multiple people involved. And I think, you know, it's really like anything that would happen, it's worth understanding, or at least better trying to dissect really what it could have been, or what we're experiencing, right? Or if it's a mental phenomenon or whatever. And, you know, instead it's just so over the top, and, you know, it's a good business for some people and everything else. Meanwhile, you have the United States government that's paying to actually look into this. So there is some realistic reality to this. So yeah, I always encourage people that are interested in this, you know, we're part of, you know, in UFOs or in anything like this, the unknown on that level, just to be a super hardcore skeptic, you know. Don't play into just everything in the sky is everything's a drone that the government's, you know, watching you, and everything is a flying saucer. But those reports that really do matter, like that F-18 that, you know, recorded that object off the Baja Peninsula, or like, you know, this thing over Oregon, right, that we've just discussed. You know, that way you can really hammer on those issues and make a case. But otherwise, it's being lost in fiction. You know,
that's right.
People laugh at it like it's nothing. And at the same time, I'm so interested in it because everybody who sends me something at the same time, or anything I see, the person that says, "Oh my gosh, UFO," that very well could be a clandestine program that I've never seen and I can identify. You know, so. Anyway, complicated subject, but
I'm a firm believer that a subject as strange as UFOs, it requires approaching it with cautious skepticism. Absolutely responsible skepticism.
Yeah, I mean, it does. And there's a lot of fun you can have with it, too. I mean, there's a lot of fun, you know, more lighthearted. You can look at kind of like legends, you know, the stuff that you know, people talk about that have largely been disproven, you know. But I see a lot of people that are kind of movers and shakers in this world. It seems like that you see on History Channel or whatever. They get, at least they're getting a lot of coverage personally, right?
Sure.
Or a lot of play. And, you know, they'll like interview people, old men that say that they were part of some project, and, you know, they play into it and they put it forward as certain fact, and it's just full of holes. It's full of time issues with the timeline that don't make any sense. And I just would really like, I think now to move this forward in a positive way, people should really start to take on a skeptical level, you know, of viewing this, and that way that 0.01 of 100% can really be examined and looked at on a scientific level, and without being laughed at.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's a big hurdle.
Yeah.
A big hurdle. So I got to say, when you posted your article with the photos of the X-44A.
Yeah.
That reminded me of something. I mean, I certainly covered it a few times over the years, but back when the X-40, the X-47B was making headlines back in like 2012, and it'd been photographed being transported during the night in where was it? It was Maryland. Yeah, Maryland. And then some other people took a picture of it somewhere and claimed that it was outside Area 51 or something. But that thing, with how its wings were positioned in transport and it was wrapped up, it had a saucer-like appearance, and people were going crazy for that.
What was it? What was the movie from the 80s?
Flight of the Navigator.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, of course. If and immediately when that came up, I did my best. Guys, it's an X-47B. It's being transported across the United States. So you're going to see pictures of this from, basically Southern California all the way to Pax River, Naval Air Station Pax River. So get used to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does. The average person is like, oh my gosh, this is exactly like what I saw in an 80s movie about, flying saucers. But really, it could take a very small cursory search on the internet to know exactly what that was.
Yeah.
But that's kind of that in itself. That aircraft, that thing moved across the nation. Did all these things, landed on a carrier, operated from a carrier, refueled autonomously from a tanker. And that's kind of when I say there's so much out there that is being tested that we don't get to see. I mean, that technology is buried. You talk to the Air Force about an unmanned combat air vehicle like that, biggest breakthrough since the jet engine, in many different ways. This thing can outperform manned tactical aircraft in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
They act like it doesn't exist. It's like a dirty word. So, they have their, and those things look, very alien. They don't look like an F-16 or even an F-117, right? Yeah. They look very different, but we're going to see more. That's going to change because as that technology continues to migrate into the mainstream, and eventually it will be an operational capability. People will be able to get used to knowing what those are in the air. So that will change. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. I just, and that's like kind of like, oh, there's a craft that I don't know what it is. It looks weird on a trailer. Okay, this is a UFO, boom. And the media hurts it. They hurt because they hurt the whole deal because it is better for a local news station to call it unknown and a mystery than it is to just figure out quickly what it is. Right. No, it's a lot less interesting when the Navy is moving a test airplane that is fully declassified to a naval test facility on the East Coast than it is we don't know XXX mystery.
Yeah.
Well,
talking about the stuff that's in the sky that we don't know, there's plenty of stuff in space too, and even something that people should be familiar with by now, the ISS, like that still throws people off because a lot of people haven't seen the ISS and what it looks like when it's doing a passover. Right. Now we're throwing in like the X-37B and other things that are going on in space. I mean,
space is the future battlefield. Yeah. I mean, it's happening now. It's our potential enemies are working day and night to deny us access, or at least the overwhelming capabilities that we have in space for our warfighters. That includes GPS. And so we're getting into the area where counter-satellite capabilities are becoming a mainstream idea, as opposed to sort of something that was, 10 years ago was sort of kind of on the dark side of things that weren't really talked about. And I'm not talking about a missile that can shoot down a satellite. That's an anti-satellite weapon. I'm talking about other satellites that can maneuver or space platforms and can disable, blind, jam, disrupt the capability of enemy satellites, even temporarily.
Yeah.
So you're talking about these types of craft will be able to maneuver, and have less predictable orbits, so even some of our people that really watch the skies, and love to track satellites and things, they'll probably start seeing some pretty unique stuff. In fact, they already have, and they've done it, for years they have, but it's going to become a very mainstream capability for not just America, but, China and Russia. They're already all over this. So space is going to really be a changing place for us in the next 10 years.
Have you speculated at all about what you think the X-37 has been up to? You know, we know some of the payloads that have been launched, but mostly it's been classified, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, you got basically a truck size of like a Ford F-150 truck bed to play with, to put something in. And then the idea that from what I understand about the system, and, you know, we've reported on it for years now, is, you know, it's not just about the payload. They're trying out other technologies as well, especially maneuvering technologies and everything else up there. So, you know, I don't know. I mean, the guess is as much as anybody else. I would imagine it's nothing that we probably haven't already talked about in this interview, as far as what's going on in space. You know, deploying small satellites, experimental payloads that have to do with multispectral payloads and or radar payloads, and being able to more easily maneuver, change orbit, and so but the X-37 is sort of like, you know, that's like a canary in the coal mine that has shown us the change that we're seeing even on the unclassified side. Yeah. Because the military now, DARPA is openly working on a two-stage to orbit spaceplane system to launch, rapidly launch anything they want into space that's up to, 10,000 pounds or whatever. And then you have multiple other applications. And that technology, being able to, like I say, this anti-satellite technology is happening so quickly, and it's massicizing in space, much faster than I think many predicted, especially amongst our adversaries. That maybe not even defending the satellites that we have or making them less easy to be tracked, but being able to actually just replace them quickly with other technologies. So if you lose one, you can rapidly get another one up in orbit. Right. That's going to be a huge part. And that includes not just what's up there. Maybe people see things, small lights in the sky or people that track near Earth objects, orbital objects. But that's going to be mothership aircraft carrying rocket payloads over public areas that go out to sea. They're going to see the launch of these missiles, at different times people are going to think, oh my gosh, what is this thing in the sky at sunset? So aviation and its relationship with space flight and space and the ability for us to access orbit is changing. And with that, the average Joe on the ground is going to be seeing things that they probably haven't seen before in areas that they haven't seen before. Right.
Yeah, for sure. The private space explosion is awesome. I mean, it's giving us a lot to sit back and watch, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I was a critic of it early on. I'm still a critic. I mean, it's really the government has funded it. So I mean, it's just,
absolutely.
It's kind of, people kind of have a weird idea of this, and I don't really see a marketplace as just exploding like they say it is. But listen, the price for admission was good enough for me. Just seeing SpaceX land those two boosters, man, that was
simultaneously. That was so rad.
That was right, man. For me, that was right out of a science fiction movie. Yep. So yeah, there's some, and that's something that's totally new, right? You're now returning, your first stage back, from launch, right, to reusable. So all these things are changing, and on top of it, you have our adversaries that are building now, like hypersonics are becoming a very for your listeners or your viewers. Hypersonics are something that's moving faster than about Mach 5, Mach 6. Okay, so this is double the speed of the SR-71 Blackbird. Hypersonics are becoming kind of like the new super weapon that adversaries and the United States are rapidly trying to develop. And mainly it's because it really can beat any defense system. It can beat a missile defense system. It's within the atmosphere, and it's very flexible and it's very fast. And so all that's going to take testing as well, and that's going to change what people are going to see in the sky and everything else. So I guess what I'm getting at, for the person that's into, or just interested in watching the sky and UFOs or all these other different topics that kind of relate to it, that the things that we've been so used, the status quo of what we see on a daily basis is changing in the sky. And keep that in mind when you see something, or when you see somebody say, hey, look at this. This is definitely, from Zordon, and this is lizard people are coming. Be the skeptic, because that's going to help when we actually see something that matters for us to really investigate it, whether it's of origin of terrestrial or extraterrestrial. Doesn't matter. Just knowing what we're seeing matters.
Yeah.
And it's going to become a much bigger deal for the government too, because these same things I'm talking about are peer states developing these weapon systems, hypersonics, stealth aircraft now are proliferating right throughout the world. Mm-hmm. Russia and China now have multiple models. Well, China does. Russia has one. The government is going to be much more interested in what people are seeing and what it's observing in different areas, on all different levels, as this Cold War that we're entering into, sadly enough, heats up. So it's a good time to be into the subject, but it's also it's really needed that people that are to be skeptical of what they're seeing and try to red team it and think of all the other things it is first before making huge claims, so we can actually understand what's happening in the world around us.
There's so much happening at such a rapid pace. It's difficult, and people are slow at getting used to all the things that are flying around. I mean, we're still the kind of flood of private drone usage, the quadcopters and things like that. It seems like so long ago, but still people see drones in the sky and are very confused by what they're seeing.
Hey, so, I remember like 3 years ago, I was at a barbecue at a friend's house, mm-hmm. and they're in a very urban area down, near where I live. And that two of these things pop up in the sky, that are all lit up and look totally, this is supposedly what I do for a living, mm-hmm. right? I mean, and for a moment I said, my God, what am I looking at? Yeah. This is before it kind of became where, Toys R Us was selling, drones to kids. But, at that moment, and I just immediately said, oh yeah, it's just a hobby copter. There's lights on it. Okay. Mm-hmm. But, even for me, it took me a moment to say, whoa, what the heck is this? Because that's exactly what we're supposed to think is abnormal, and especially something that's hovering and moving in a weird direction at night. You don't have any depth perception. You don't have any idea of really its relation to the ground on distance. So, yeah, it is all changing. That's a great point. Just the hobby drones, it's something you can buy for a few $100s. Mm. Can 10 years ago look like something totally out of this world to people. Right. So yeah, it's definitely becoming a more, I'd say, a more target-rich environment, but it's decoys everywhere from what really are things that don't make sense and don't have an answer to. And part of that too is like the obsession with bases, military bases. A lot of times, like when I'm just going through different stuff, the area of defense coverage and ufology sort of blends together based on a Google search at times. You come across different things. And there's a lot of people that will point to every military base mm-hmm. and say, oh, there's this is secret. They're doing this there. They're doing that. I've been on most of those, all over most of those bases. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing like that happening. There's no secret squirrel stuff happening at an Air National Guard base in Fresno. You know what I mean? It's just not at all happening there. We have areas for that. We have installations that specialize in dealing with those projects. And once again, it kind of goes back to everybody wanting to have a story mm-hmm. instead of just, being amazed with the few great stories we have. It's just so much disinformation that it's hard to cut through it, and honestly, the Defense Department seems to agree because they spent millions of dollars researching this recently. Yeah, that's right. So let me jump into UFOs just for a minute and the UFO community that we've talked about. I know one thing that has certain groups within the UFO community have really been passionate about and latched onto for years and years, claiming that the military has this secret TR-3B. Are you familiar with the TR-3B? Very much so. I would love to hear what you have to say about the TR-3B. Right. So that's one of those places that we just discussed, where we have the kind of hard defense coverage, even whether you like it or not, spill into sort of this unknown, let's put it, category, right? Mm-hmm. Of almost a UFO level or whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, what you're talking about here is anti-gravity, flying triangle that has ability to generate massive amounts of energy to be able to, it has to, or some sort of field, and it kind of goes back to the Bob Lazar stuff and, all that sort of background. I'd say it's kind of where the UFO lexicon or lore enters into Area 51. Okay, let's put it that way. I'm going to say this straight off. I have never seen one bit of credible information that Area 51 does anything else but test aircraft that are man-made, that are not, of alien nature. Okay, let's just put it that way. This thing, some people, it seems that some people claim that it's man-made. It's like a Lockheed Martin product or something. What it all comes down to is some sort of like anti-gravity capability that was, maybe has been tested. Now, I cannot tell you definitively that doesn't exist. There's never been experiments in anti-gravity propulsion. I think it'd be presumptuous for me to say that on many levels. In fact, there's maybe some evidence to point to the opposite direction. At the same time, I can't say that this thing does exist or doesn't or anything else. I don't think it does because I just don't think that we're there capability-wise at all. But others will argue that these things get buried for a lot of reasons. And, some of it has to do with everything from the potential for the technology to change our reliance on fossil fuels. And everything else. And I think those are arguments that are worth having. Definitely. I mean, I've talked to people in that world, and there is a lot of incredible technology that is likely just wrapped up in deep classification that will probably never see the light of day until it's developed independently in the commercial world for other reasons. Okay. So I think that's fair to say for people. Now, there's been a lot of sightings of this type of thing. Like I remember Belgium, people said that they were seeing them. Usually 3 lights and a big one in the center, etc. Here's what I do have to say. Okay. TR3, the TR3 there's actually 2 different aircraft. The TR3 that I talk about as a potential aircraft that had existed is a reconnaissance aircraft and potentially electronic warfare aircraft that was developed in the late 80s, early 90s, and deployed in very small numbers for a period of time. That aircraft is known widely in the defense circles as Black Manta. It would have a very similar planform to what we're talking about. It's not an anti-gravity vehicle. It's an airplane, It just looks different. And that aircraft, there was lots of different spottings, and really there's a hole beyond what people have seen about it. There's a hole in the lineage of what is like persistent surveillance over enemy territory. Reconnaissance changed for the Air Force dramatically in the late 70s, early 80s. Before then, it's about the U-2, it's about satellites, it's about the SR-71 Blackbird mainly, right, for strategic type reconnaissance. What those things do is they fly over and they take a picture or they take readings in a moment of time. It is a snapshot device, okay? Whereas in the early 80s, an aircraft named Tacit Blue, made by Northrop, stealth aircraft that was able to field a massive radar and use data links that were hard to intercept by the enemy, meaning they couldn't really detect where emissions were coming from. So they couldn't detect the aircraft in the airspace even by its own emissions, even though it was also incredibly hard to spot by radar. This aircraft, and this is all known, all declassified, you can read all about it, Tacit Blue, also called the Whale. This aircraft proved that you can send a surveillance system with high-powered emitters like a radar and data links, which have to do with unmanned systems. It's how you would control an unmanned system and pass information off that aircraft to the ground or around the world for exploitation. It was proven that that system could persist over enemy territory for long periods of time and get a much sweeter grade of intelligence than a Blackbird could or a satellite could that just takes a picture or readings in a moment in time. Okay? That revolution in surveillance came later on as stealth progressed. We didn't see that appear as an actual operational aircraft until the RQ-170 first appeared in Kandahar, Afghanistan in the late 2000s. Okay? We didn't that it was like, decades before that incredible capability was supposedly operationally fielded in a different fashion, but the same idea. Okay. There is a huge gap between Tacit Blue and that RQ-170 that obviously the Air Force was very interested in that capability and fielding it, but we have no program that did it. It's like it just went away.
Wow.
And so the TR-3, that the Black Manta that I talk about, or an aircraft similar to it, would have been a penetrating reconnaissance and electronic warfare aircraft that would have been manned, that would have bridged that gap between Tacit Blue and the RQ-170 that we see today. That aircraft would have been flying in the 90s. It would have been, deployed to operational theaters in the Middle East. And it would have done everything from battle damage assessment and worked with potentially the F-117 or stealth attack aircraft to also provide maybe electronic warfare forward deployed, so it can help make those aircraft more survivable. So we don't know if it existed. There's a lot of rumors about it. But like I say, what we do know is that there's a gap. Okay. And I believe that an aircraft like that would be something that people would very easily look at and say, oh my gosh, that is like nothing I've ever seen. It's a flying wedge. Maybe that could have easily, I think it could have easily been construed as this other TR-3B craft that, we have less of a, at least a historical reason for it existing and, a background for it to actually come into play. So they do line up timeline when this thing started to appear and kind of when this actual aircraft or this, more, I should say, less exotic aircraft could have been flying. And so that's something to keep in mind. And there's and not just the sightings that we've seen. There's a crash in the UK where at the base over there where Kinetic is based, where they do all the testing that you can read about, that very well could have been this similar aircraft. So something to think about, that, there was a very similar project that potentially existed that's still highly classified that could have looked very much like something like we've been described, but it wouldn't have been an anti-gravity machine or anything like this. It would have been something much more, less exotic, but it still looked interesting. It would look similar. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. All right. I got one more question for you and then I'll let you go. But you mentioned how you're contacted constantly with various UFO sighting reports and things, people wanting you to tell them what they've seen. What is the most fascinating or I guess intriguing report you've ever received?
It hasn't been something that was sent to me.
Okay.
I have somebody that I've known, some people I know saw something in the 80s that to this day, and I really don't want to get into it, but to this day is the most amazing report I've ever heard from people that never watched Star Trek. They have no interest in anything like this. Yeah. It's nothing that, they've got no, in fact, it was a very big burden to them, I think, more than it was an incredible experience where maybe you or I would have loved it regardless of the fear of seeing something that was unexplained. But, so that's really the only thing that I've known of anybody that personally that has had something that was very unique. Now I get stuff a lot of people that see stuff in the sky lot of conclusions of military, like I say, military bases nearby. You know, let's put it this way: when I wrote the piece on the aircraft, when I put that together, on the aircraft, the October 25th deal that we discussed previously, that came off of people that kind of I knew in the Northwest here that are in the aviation world that said, hey, kind of heard rumors that this sort of happened, bits and pieces. Maybe there's an airplane, there's a scramble with F-15s. And I didn't even think twice of it. I didn't even look into it because I hear that all the time.
Right.
You know, and I came across a Reddit thread of pilots and air traffic controllers that were involved potentially in that matched what I'd heard in pieces. Right. All of a sudden it was sort of, corroborated at least on a social media level, which is a very low bar. Okay.
Yeah.
But that spurred me to go and actually look into this and then go to the FAA and go through all the steps of the military to get to where we eventually got.
Yeah.
So the majority of them are not, are just, they're just junk. A couple of them, I mean, some people have done their own FOIAs and come up with some interesting stuff. They saw aircraft or fighter aircraft following object, and they've actually gotten responses from inconclusive radar returns and things. So there's some of that. I get a lot of black helicopter stuff.
Sure.
I mean, it endless stuff about, oh my gosh, black helicopters. I see them all the time. Da, 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 da. I mean, listen, like the 106 or the 160th Special Operations Air Regiment are the guys that are kind of the top of the line for the Army, and for all special operations. They fly charcoal black helicopters. They train everywhere. They train all over. They train in urban environments. They'll go to an urban environment. I mean, you can look up Denver and see them flying around. It spooked a bunch of people. Listen, it's just a military capability. They're not doing anything more than training for, what they do. And what they do is they fight. They go and kill bad guys. I mean, they have a pretty hardcore job at that. They're busy doing that. They're not busy mutilating cows or anything else. They're busy training for those capabilities. So, and a lot of times it's always an object that's seen and then a helicopter appears, but then you look at it, it doesn't make any sense what they're saying. So I just had one that we're on the topic of like hoaxes or maybe misunderstandings or whatever.
Sure.
I saw a image was sent to me of a very unique looking swing wing, bomber looking aircraft that was supposedly spotted in South Carolina. It was a very unique looking picture. I looked through it with my editing, my photo knowledge, and I'm just not incredible, but I can work Photoshop a bit to see if there's any real quick signs that there is any issues with the image, and it didn't show up. And so I just put it on Twitter and said, hey guys, this is probably a hoax, but what do you think? I have a bunch of defense people follow me and everything else. And, we went through, people were pretty stunned by it. They were like, oh, that looks, like this, like that. Everybody was engaged trying to figure out what it was.
Yeah.
And one guy puts up a clip from a documentary, a really well done little documentary about the supersonic transport that was Boeing designed in the 60s, and found the exact clip that this guy who swore to me that this was this, and this. And, obviously I didn't take it. I knew that this was probably not real. That's why I put it and asked people what they thought. And I go back to the guy and I say, hey man, what, I wasn't even mad because I know nuts exist, I said, but what's the get out of this for you? Like what, I mean, I didn't even make an article on it or anything. It was going to get debunked.
Yeah.
And I get crazy talk back. Just not even like the guy went from being able to discuss normal conversation with people to just random crazy talk. People have their motivations. I'm telling you this. They have their motivations. They want to see something. They want attention. They want to be, I don't know. I don't understand it, but I do understand that it exists. And for all your viewers, please don't feed them, try to debunk it, put it out there, and say, hey, how can we debunk this? Don't say, hey, this is proof that this is happening and they're all around us. And, there's this extrapolation that rolls out. I think that everybody would be better off in that, in both any sort of scientific level or any looking at any sort of object in the sky or trying to figure out what is happening in the world around us, if they were skeptics first, and try to find when those people are proven to be a hoax and they've perpetuated it knowingly, ostracize them. Don't feed them, because those same guys are being paid money to go on History Channel and going on these ridiculous programs that go out and put a bunch of stuff into normal people's heads that aren't accurate, and it ruins the chances of us finding out real information that can change maybe, the course of human events. Okay, right. Who knows?
Yeah, that's right.
So that's all, that's my case. And it's not just me. It's the United States Department of Defense that agrees that this is something that they're interested in.
Yeah, that's very true. Tyler, you do fantastic work, and the Oregon UFO story was just absolute fun to listen through that audio. So thank you for your journalism, your responsible journalism, and your diving and doing the FOIA to get that information, because that's such a fascinating case. But you do good work. Where can people go? Where's the best place for people to go to follow what you do?
Really simple. It's thewarzone.com. They'll take you right to my particular page, and you can go and look through our articles, what we do every day. And happy to have your viewers and listeners come on over and listen. If don't be afraid to send me an email. I love to chat, or if you do see something, happy to look at it for you. But just keep in mind, I'm not there to be a cheerleader. I'm there to tell you that it's either nothing, or I don't know, or maybe I can't identify it. But I'm not there to perpetuate any sort of hoaxes or anything like that. And
right. You're someone without an agenda. You're somebody with specific knowledge, and that's a valuable tool.
Right. But I'm happy I love to talk to people. I love to talk to my readers, and happy to engage on that level. And hopefully we can get some more information about what's going on, and on all different levels. And like I say, this DOD thing was a big break for all of this. And hopefully we can learn more in the future. It might just be a matter of time.
Yep. Well said. Well, thanks so much for hanging out today, Tyler. We really appreciate it.
Hey, no worries. Have a good one, and thanks for talking. I appreciate it.
Thanks again to Tyler for taking the time to talk with us about these fascinating UFO encounters. If you haven't listened to any of it, I encourage you to go to thewarzone.com and listen to some of the audio from either of these incidents. Well, that's all for this episode of Spacing Out. Let us know if you enjoyed today's show by liking the episode on YouTube and leaving us your comments in the section below. You can also download our UFO podcast, Unknown, on Apple Podcasts, or listen at rogueplanet.tv/unknown.
We also invite you to join us in our Rogue Planet Facebook group, where we post things related to spacing out and Rogue Planet. This group is an easy place for you to interact with us, join in on the conversation, and all the things we talk about in this show. We've also just launched the Rogue Planet store, and you can go to store.rogueplanet.tv and check out all the t-shirts and other offerings we have there, and we'll be sure to add new products frequently.
Our website, rogueplanet.tv, is where you can go for all the latest UFO-related news and other strange content. And follow us on Twitter at RoguePlanetHQ. Our email address is contact@rogueplanet.tv. But if you'd like to send us letters, gifts, or anything else by mail, you can do that too. Just send it to Rogue Planet at 1934 East Camelback Road, number 120, Phoenix, Arizona, 85016.
Thanks again for joining us today. I'm Maureen Elsberry.
And I'm Jason McClellan. We will see you in the future.